Hi, Keap community. Otium is thrilled to introduce our friend and client, David of the Star Raft Project. We are proud of all that they have been able to achieve and know that the automations we assembled that are powered by Keap enabled the Star Raft Project to impact the lives of more people more consistently on the leanest of budgets. In the next couple of minutes, David is going to tell us the story of Sarah. We'll talk about how we used Keap to invite participation, follow up, track attendance at online events, record agency referrals, and send broadcasts to the funders and participants that we engage with in the entire community. We'll talk about how many communities there are with needs just like Sarah's, and we'll talk about the future as we think big to enable leaders to scale the Star Raft Project model into new places. As we reflect on Keap's values, the following shine in the Star Raft Project. They genuinely care, they build trust, and they win together. And I'd like to invite David to the stage to talk about Sarah. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Cam. I appreciate this opportunity.
So you were telling me a story about Sarah, and I thought that talking about Sarah would be a great place to start.
Because Sarah and her mom had gotten isolated in a independent living apartment set up 60 miles away from their home community, 60 miles away from church, from their friends, from all the places that were of interest to them, and 60 miles away from all the relationships that were important in their lives. So her dad asked me to help pull together the people who knew and loved her and the people who knew and loved and were trusted by her mom and her family. And we did that over a series of meetings. One set of meetings was a training that we do over four four sessions, 4 weeks, in terms of helping people learn the practical steps in gathering their circle, setting a good direction, taking the helm, and keeping it going for the long run. Because having been a family member of someone with a disability myself, I know that every parent gets night sweats over the question, who's going to be here for my child after I'm gone? So we had a series of meetings, starting with Sarah and her immediate family, and help them identify the people that they wanted and that she wanted to invite into her circle to help move things forward and dig out of the isolated situation that she was in. We began to meet with those circle members, introduce them to the concept, and gave them a chance to identify what they appreciated and admired about her, what they loved about her, and the difference that she'd been making in their lives. And this is really an important step because if we're sorry, if we're not on purpose about it, our life and our story can get focused entirely on how many problems we're having, on all the difficulties, on all the medical appointments. And that was exactly what had happened to her. So we brought these folks together, and one of the things that we did was a 3 hour facilitated graphic plan that the circle members created, Sarah and her family, and the circle members created about how they wanted to be moving forward. And once we got that sort of North Star picture, talked about if you're doing good work in this direction, say for a year, what could you have accomplished? They identified a number of things that they felt they could accomplish and exactly how they would accomplish those things. And one of the things that happens is that as people are having that conversation, they're kind of making micro commitments to each other and to the person at the center and the family and to themselves. So it's a very engaging process. We end every meeting by getting a first steps commitment from every single person in the room, whether that's the 3 hour planning meeting or any subsequent circle meetings. And over the course of the next 3 weeks, the circle people got together, figured it out, moved 8 items from the next steps list to the done list. We start every meeting by celebrating the done list. And they solved an immediate wheelchair accessibility problem that they were having where they were living at the moment. But then over the next 3 months, they moved 28 major items from that next steps list to the done list and got waivers, financial support from the state, got good direct support worker helpers lined up, created a new relationship, a new agreement with their support provider, found accessible housing, and in their home community, and they're working their way now toward reestablishing life. And reestablishing life for Sarah took several forms in terms of things that she wanted to be getting back to. One set of things is her role as an advocate, as a mover and shaker in the platform committee of her favorite political party, of volunteering to support seniors who are also experiencing disconnection, to working on environmental issues and things like that. And even though she's not living in her hometown again yet, she's now doing all of these things via Zoom and by making trips back to the hometown. She's back to writing, she's back to presenting and performing her poetry and doing speech making in terms of the statewide disability council. So some big changes have happened in her life. Now, what we've been doing is keeping track of all this in Keap, but keeping people connected through a combination of Keap and Zoom and a little graphic platform called Trello, and incorporating all of these into a kind of seamless experience for those folks. And Cam, you've been really helpful to us in figuring out how to accomplish those things. I'm not a I'm good at what I do, but I'm not good at those kinds of track keeping measures. And this has been a godsend. Keap
That's
also allowed us to train in one of the other central United States 600 case coordinators in the state system, being able to use Keap automations to get back to all of these folks, to keep them engaged, to keep them learning, and to keep them making and keeping their commitments to each other was really a big deal.
yeah, that's I think a really spectacular story about Sarah, and also about how you use technology to enable the circle around Sarah. So just as I think about Sarah's story, the progression that she went through. So there is Sarah and her mom in a community, and they have been moved further away from their circle, their kind of naturally existing circle of support,
Right.
and find this place. So she faces this problem of isolation and disconnection from her community. And through the course of your work, she gets to meet you and the Star Raft Project, and you put them through your 4-part training series on building circles of support. You ask them to take action where they build a circle with and around Sarah in her very own community, and then that ends in the success of her being able to reconnect with her interests and her art, like her poetry, and also become an advocate in her community. I think seeing that path of going from isolation to artist or isolation to advocate is a really powerful part of how you've just described Sarah's story, and definitely how you explained it to me when we first started working on this. But I think what's really special to note about Sarah's story is that similar stories exist in every community. There might be nuances regarding the specific challenges or the opportunity that that individual and family is facing, but the general experience, the common experience, and the systems of support are repeatable ones. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just people with disabilities and their families and communities across the USA and Canada.
Sure. A couple of other really specific stories about this kind of process. One grandmother wanted to create what she described as a soft landing for her grandson when grandma goes to heaven. And they had moved closer to one of the other family members, but in the course of that, actually, again, lost connection with the people who'd known him and been supporting him for quite some time. We helped them uh, construct a circle in their locality. And actually, one of the people that they invited, we asked them to think about who lights up when he comes into the room. And one of the people who sort of met that is the receptionist at his doctor's office. They're in a small town. She really loves him. And she also knows everybody else in town because he's the only general practice doctor in town. So she became a member of the circle who was able to identify and bring into the game, bring into the story, lots of other people who reflected, who mirrored his interests and the kinds of things that he was good at. Again, we really focus on the positives. We recognize and identify and figure out how to overcome the challenges that are caused by disability and isolation and social distancing and so on. But we keep the circle focused on the positives as well. That was one. Another was a family who needed to create that kind of soft landing for a couple of 11-year-old kids where both parents were facing lethal health conditions. And they did that and kept meeting and working for about 18 months. And one day, one of the parents went into the hospital for a checkup and didn't come out because she passed away in the hospital that day. And the other parent, who was also living with early onset Alzheimer's, was unable to cope at all, to even get out of bed and make breakfast in the morning. Something really powerful happened there, Cam, which is that the circle, as soon as one of the people in the circle heard what was going on, they pulled together what they were calling the soft landing committee. And three people met these children coming out of school at 3:30 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon and embraced them and told them what had happened and invited them home. And they ended up with a permanent place to be and to be adopted and to continue their lives with their school and their friends and their activities and so on. I think they were about 12 and a half years old at that point. Another family was a first generation immigrant family. The dad had been invited to come from his home country to work for one of the major electronic companies in the state that they lived in as an engineer, as an electronics engineer. They all moved. And again, they became isolated because dad was at work all the time. Mom is home with a kid with some major sort of processing and expressive problems, which are usually called autism, and getting completely worn out, zero connections in the community. They had money to hire people to come in and help, but no way of doing that. So they asked us to come and help them expand the uh, search party for good direct support workers who met their criteria for quality, but who also had good standing in the community where they lived. And we again started out by asking them to identify one or two people who they already knew and trusted and who knew and trusted them, who could help them expand that search party because their surface area with the existing surrounding community was practically zero. They invited two people, and those two people built the circle to five. And those five people brought in some great direct support workers within 3 weeks. One of the important things about that story is about 3 months into this work, and we had done that same kind of beautiful person centered plan and family centered plan. About 3 months into that work, the circle was having a meeting and talking about what their next steps were. And mom was the last person to speak. And at one point, you could see the dad's hand going up to her shoulder to give her some comfort and courage and encouragement. because what she needed to say is my next step is I need to take a step back from all of the detail involved in this because I've just received a diagnosis of very advanced breast cancer. I'm going in for an emergency major operation next week. I'm going to be recovering from that operation for several weeks and then going into chemotherapy. I don't know how I'm going to handle things at home. And what happened was that the circle jumped in. All of these people who had been focused on the daughter and changing conditions and changing opportunities for the daughter said, Mom, this is your circle as well. And they figured out over the course of the next half hour how they were going to collaborate to support mom and the daughter and the dad, who now had to do all the cooking, with day to day life as she's in this process of recovery. Every time we get together, we celebrate the done list. And the done list now include mom's improvement, but also the way that the circle members were supporting this family. There are stories like this again and again. Each one of them is different, as you sort of rightly identified. But the process for solving many of these problems is identical. One of the things that's part of this as well is that this isn't throwing away the direct support professional services that people need. It's working in collaboration with them in a different way. And it's not replacing mom, it's not replacing the family. What the circle does is it kind of opens up the family and includes more people in the beautiful, devoted work that the family's been doing all along. We've done the initial training with hundreds of people. And what we're looking at doing now is doing this deep dive work with as many people as we can fit in. We've moved recently from a sort of well-financed uh, developmental disabilities council project to continuing that work in the state where they were financing it for the next year, but also doing everything that we're doing without charge to that state, that council, or to the families for free.
Right.
And the other thing that we're doing is we're developing coaches and we're developing trainers because the dad, for example, in that last story that I told you, is a natural coach, a natural instigator, and can be one of the people who helps the next family do this kind of work. We've been looking at different organizations that have figured out how to do this kind of work uh, for the cost of walking through the door. And AA is one, La Leche League is another. So that's how we're kind of looking at evolving as a nonprofit over the next several years.
Right.
I'm really a lucky person. I'm 80 years old and I'm doing the work that I absolutely love. And whether it's paid or free, absolutely really doesn't matter. But we're looking at a whole lot of other different ways of engaging people to pay this forward as they experience it themselves and then can sort of enthusiastically become the kind of guides, the kind of coaches that you're talking about.
Yeah.
And by the way, I want to thank you for telling that story in a way that not only re-inspires me, but gives me new ways of thinking about it and new ways of talking about it.
As we talk about how common this story is, I'd like to call your attention, everyone's attention, to this very conference of Keap customers, partners, and employees. Up to
Mm-hmm.
10% of the Keap community, right here at the conference, will have a family member who is experiencing disabilities, whether that be a developmental disability, autism, sensory disability, communication disability. In Sarah's story, you talked about a mobility challenge, disability, and more. So
Right.
it's just obvious that in any community or any circle, even those who have gathered here this week for this conference, there are so many people who could benefit from a program like the Star Raft Project.
Right. We have opened up the training for free on Zoom every every Tuesday, 4 Tuesdays a month, forever. And so I'm going to send you, and you can forward to Keap the invitation to jump in on those Zoom trainings. The other thing is that one of my background stories is that I worked in mental health and child welfare and supports for substance abuse, people who were struggling with substance abuse. When I was in the child welfare system, I was in government, and we used to kind of march kids off the gangplank when they turned 18 and a half. And I look back on that experience and think, what if we knew about this circle building work because it hadn't really been created yet, and created soft landings for each of those kids as they kind of aged out of the child welfare system. The other thing that we've noticed is that all of us get older, and many of us, as older family members, become caregivers for a wife or a husband who is now dealing with Parkinson's or now dealing with Alzheimer's and things like that. The same process applies. The same benefits show up when the first and second and third circle member join. There's one or two more people who know us and who trust us and who understand us. There's one or two more people who can create opportunities for people to continue making their contribution, even if they're struggling with Alzheimer's, for example, or other kinds of challenges. So this is a relatively new. We've been doing this work now for about 10 years intensively idea. And I wish I could go back and redo some of the work that I did as a government person in mental health and child welfare and developmental disability services. And what we're trying to do right now is to open it up. Keap has really helped us again with that because there's an enormous amount of sort of tracking and reconnecting and bringing people back into the game that at the scale that we're looking at even now is just impossible to do at at the level of me working in my home office. So the automations are making a huge difference.
Let's talk for a minute then about the future. The Star Raft Project is just wrapping up its current program. It had a I'm not sure that we'd call it a pilot program, but a fixed term program with
Right.
one particular state authority, and that's ending as you've done the work, you've gathered the evidence, you've done the things, and now it's time to think big. So where are we going? How do you take that Michigan evidence and make it
Right.
have a life beyond you, beyond me, beyond one
Right.
tech product in Keap? How do you see this thing moving on?
Okay. That's a good question. First of all, the what Michigan gave us, in addition to the opportunity to roll this out on a sustained basis in one locality, was the opportunity to build a set of scripts, a set of videos, a set of training patterns, training rhythms that we can now offer essentially for free for the long run. And so the the offer to jump in uh, nationwide or continent wide is really there, and it's easy for us to do. It's an hour and a half every Tuesday morning for as long as I have breath, and as we begin to involve people who've been in these circles as hosts for that training opportunity, there's no reason that that can't continue. Zoom is virtually free. Um, Keap is affordable. The Alstation people have made Trello available to us for a very very deep discount. So the technology that we need, but also the time that we need to do that is free. What's tricky in terms of thinking about continuity and scaling up is that the deep dive work of helping an individual family get those first three meetings where they gather their circle and get ready for the 3 hour facilitated planning session, and then meet for three or four more meetings afterwards to get into the rhythm and the practice of continuing circle meetings and adapting as they go along, but also taking their own responsibility for running their own meetings, for being the person who's the host, for being the person who's the radio operator and gets in touch with everybody, for being the person who's capturing those little windows of opportunity that wake up in our conversations when they say, I know somebody who does this. We need to turn that, the deep dive systematically turns those micro roles over. That I haven't figured out yet how to do that for free. But what I'm doing is I'm looking into organizations like AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, where there's a tradition of sponsorship, there's a tradition of growing leadership, and where the cost of getting in is literally walking through the door, wanting to be in the room. Another similar kind of enterprise has been La Leche League, which is the mom's breastfeeding work that's been done for 50 years. Some of them elect to become La Leche League hosts and La Leche League leaders and La Leche League trainers. So I think there's a way of doing that. When I was looking at that question a while back, I found that AA had 7 people employed in the national office, and they were basically involved in shipping books. And at the same time, the Girl Scouts of America had 700 people employed on a full-time basis to keep Girl Scouts of America running. And I thought that's not sustainable for somebody like us over time, because then you're into the care and feeding and management of 700 direct support staff.
Yeah.
We need to figure out a way that's a more naturalistic and community based and enthusiasm based and commitment based way of doing this.
I think if I can bridge back to the nerdy, Otium and Keap and technology part of this, when I think about an organization with 7 people versus one with 700 people, and when both are recognizable brands and both of them have national or international reaches, you wonder what they're doing differently. And what has been obvious to me in the time that we've been working together is that you were thinking about building a system, right? If we've put 2,000 contacts through the process and served a few hundred, many hundreds of them with training, to have built that 4-part training series, to have built the automation that delivers it, to have built the integration with the webinar platform is likely the only way that as we go through 2023 and 2024, thinking about doing more of this work in more states. It's not about you serving every state. It's about, as you mentioned earlier, finding people who want to become champions, who can pick up the playbook, can pick up the 4-part training series, can pick up the deep dive facilitator's guide, can pick up a piece of technology like a landing page for inviting people and change up the dates and facilitator's name, and then have that machine run at scale. So I think it's been really interesting that we're looking at a project that is so human centric on what it achieves, but lets the boring, repetitive, and costly stuff be done by machines. In this case, advanced automations and some Zapier and some Zoom and these types of things that make those things work. The terrifying undertaking of having to make this thing scale across the country, it makes it feel it's just kind of multiples of the same. It's not actually infinitely more. It's multiples of the same work, which I think is kind of freeing in terms of imagining what it's going to be like to grow this thing. And I just want to highlight, I think you were not boastful, perhaps a little bit the opposite as it relates to your ambition for the last couple of months of 2022 and into 2023. I have some notes from our last conversation, and that is that even upon ending the formal funded program, you are going to do 48 more training events across 12 new cohorts. So you're going to offer that 4-part series to introduce people to building circles of support 12 more times for 48 more events. And of those, within those 48 more events, you're selecting 32 families personally to take through the deep dive process of having a facilitated and graphically
Right.
represented plan centered around that person and their communities. With that, we need to find new states and new service providers who, if you're exhausted after these next 48 events, maybe a couple more state partners or a couple more agencies want to scale this model.
Yeah, one of the things that we've been blessed with recently is half a dozen organizations, provider organizations, who say, we would love to learn how to do this for the families that we support, for the individual people and the individual families that we support. So, one of the things that I'm looking forward to doing is to say, you can get the training for free. That's always, that's a standing commitment. But if you want to do a sort of pilot project and do deep dives with a half a dozen or a dozen families, uh, here's what it would cost. And because that, and then that, that covers the our out of pocket expenses. We ran this thing for the first 7 years on the basis of our grocery budget, and we're prepared to do a lot of that going forward. But if we're expanding that, especially over the next 12, 14 months, it's really helpful to have small provider organizations make those kinds of commitments. It actually works well for the providers because it makes their work more sensible. Makes their work more effective. And in the course of doing that, we're training their their organizers, their managers, their supervisors, their direct support staff to approach their work in a very different way. We've realized for some time that what we're doing is building a pattern language for a different way of approaching disability, but especially of approaching the question of people's coming to their full standing in community with the help of an invitation and introductions of good community partners.
Are there any parting words that you would like to leave us
Think
with today?
that none of this is rocket science. It's actually all stuff that people have known how to do for a very long time, but need to help in remembering how to do it. The fact is, all of us stand between two maps. One is the boundary with the service system, which is always a tough boundary to navigate because it's based on eligibility, and the eligibility is based on how many problems you show up with. And there's that game of competitive misery. But the other thing is that governments are always under siege in terms of the tax base and where do we spend the money. And we've just had a housing crisis or a financial crisis. We know a couple of state governments that are just on the verge of going broke. The state itself is not the source for continuity and innovation and sustainability that the families need. So the other side of that map is the boundary with the community. And people actually need to be reminded that the boundary with the community has a different operating system than the boundary with the service system. And the operating system is based on person to person introduction and storytelling and hospitality and agreement rather than eligibility. So that's one thing that gives me hope and gives the families hope. By the way, one mom at one point said, I've been connected with the Alzheimer's Society for 14 and a half years, and I've never heard anything even remotely like this. And she said, this is the first thing that a family should hear. And that brings me to tears and energy at the same time because I wanted to be the first thing that families can hear. The other is that the circle and the family and community partners and professional allies can make changes to what's going on a virtually instantaneous basis. So when that mom came out with a diagnosis of very aggressive breast cancer, the circle was able to instantly respond. And that would have been a tough slog for the government health program or the government child welfare program or the government disability program to adapt to in the moment. So there's a lot of opportunity for rapid response that exists in those circles, but also in collaboration with government. The the last part of that is that it's a personal story for me. When we were getting kids out of an institution in Winnipeg, the woman who later became my wife saw this little kid 40 feet away in a big day room full of kids in wheelchairs. And they smiled at each other and they immediately fell in love with her. And they adopted her. And about 10 years later, they adopted me because Amber thought that adoption would be good for everybody. And we had 10 more wonderful years with her. Our expectation was that she was going to outlive us and that our continuity of care plan was that we were all going to live to be 140 years old together and go up in a booth. But it didn't work out that way. Some things caught up with her body. But uh, that the whole medical system wasn't able to keep ahead of. Um, I still miss the weight of her in my arms, but in some ways, she's still around telling me what to do. And part of what she's reminding me of, because she actually created a little speech for a gathering of about 300 people, a conference of 300 people in Maine one time. She said, "It's about love. It's about always you and I together. I love you and I'm glad for you." And she says, "I know about your interest in creating beautiful lives for people." And there was more to it. She used a form of augmentative system, AI based facilitated communication to say those things. It took her weeks to create this conversation. But even that little talk, even those little words are making a big difference in people's lives because they're remembering what's at the heart of this. And the heart of it is working that boundary with the community as effectively as we work the boundary with the service system. The thing that gives me hope and a lot of other people hope is that that's actually always available. There's no obstacles to that except for getting the word out. And the thing that Keap and the other technology that has become far more affordable these days and far more accessible to early adopters, but also to brand new users, has made it possible for this to be delivered instantly and widely and at virtually no expense or in a completely affordable way that simply was not available 10 years ago. 10 years ago, we'd have had to have been going around and doing conferences, and the conference would have to be paid for, for hotel space and transportation, and families who could only afford it could come to the conference. And these days we can roll it out for free, and that's an incredible blessing that we're all living with. These are tough times, but at least we can get this part out for free.
It's a it's really amazing and beautiful to hear the connection, your personal connection, your partner's connection, your family's connection to this work. And and why you're driven to do it. And when I saw that there was a Power and Purpose award, I thought, what more purpose is there than to affect people, to affect the lives of people in the way you have? So I'm proud of you. I'm proud of Star Raft Project, proud of Keap and Otium for the small part that we get to have in your effort. And I'm proud that all of us have been able to take part in this important work, and we'll
Right.
continue to use Keap's tools and their community so that the Star Raft Project can keep going, they can
Right.
keep growing, and they can keep serving their community. So thank you so much
And
for sharing the stories with us today, David.
okay, and I want to say one last word of appreciation to you, Cam, and also to send this signal out. Cam has helped us above and beyond what we've been able to fund. And my guess is that, as my friend Don says, Dave, you're doing work that's and probably making about minimum wage in Canadian funds these days. Cam has been generous with his time. We still want to be fair to Cam and to people who are providing the kinds of technical support services and technical support utilities. But we have really appreciated the fact that you've kind of gotten hooked on this story and on what we've been trying to do, and we appreciate that. I'm not uh, ever going to ask you to volunteer your time, but I've appreciated the fact that you've taken a bit of a hit with some of this. But what you've done is helped us move this into a state where it actually can scale up, where it actually can expand.
Well, thank
And
you.
that would not have been possible
Thank
otherwise.
you.
So thanks, bud.
Thank you're very welcome. And I you, you know, we have a son in our household on the autism spectrum as well, and you know, the first inquiry from you was, "Hey, can you fix this campaign?" And here we are, a couple of years later, still working on it. So I appreciate the opportunity to be involved,
Right.
and I appreciate the kind words. So